You're first going to want to go over to the rectangle table and look at all the different leaves from a different class. We're looking, not touching, but we're deciding which color of glaze we want to glaze our leaf. So once you decide that, you can then go forward with the next step. So first is deciding what color to glaze your leaf. First thing I'm going to do when I get my clay piece is I'm going to carry it with two hands, I only have one because I'm videoing, over to the sink, and I am going to use the water from the sink just to rinse off my dish, both sides. This just removes any oils or anything that might be on the dish, because if those are on there, then the dish sometimes won't accept the glaze. You'll have some parts that aren't glazed. So the first thing I want to do is just rinse it, and then I use two hands to carry it back to my sink. Based on the example that Mrs. Snyder showed us, the different colors of glaze, I'm going to go to the cart and choose the color I want to glaze on my leaf. You're only using one color. You want to pay attention to the label and make sure it is the color that you want, because when I look at this glaze, what color does it look like it is? Even though when it finally gets fired, this glaze turns into this color, foliage green. So something happens inside the kiln that changes it. So make sure you have the color that you want, and be okay if it doesn't match with what it's going to look like when it's finally done. It will. So I've decided to use bluegrass, which I know will end up looking kind of like this color. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do when I get my glaze, I'm going to open it carefully, not let it tip. Okay, when I look inside there, I see maybe some like watery stuff. I want to take my brush. We're going to be using these big brushes on the cart, and I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to carefully start mixing it. I want to go slowly because I don't want to spill. And I'm going to even mix it all the way down to the bottom. So my goal is every time that I mix a glaze when I first get it, so that all of it is mixed up. Now I don't want my brush to be really dirty, so I'm just wiping it here on the edge. Okay, now that I've got it nice and mixed, I'm just wiping. I'm not tapping it. Not yet. Okay, so first step, I'll leave this here on my placemat. I'm going to turn my leaf over. Where are you starting glazing? On the back. So on this back side, we're going to glaze the entire back of this, because when it goes inside the kiln, Mrs. Snyder is going to use this little guy here called a stilt. The stilt goes in the back of the clay to keep it from touching the shelf of the kiln, because if this glaze gets on the kiln, it will stick to it and it won't come off, okay, because it turns into like glass. So we're going to glaze the entire bottom, but we normally leave the bottom unglazed unless we're going to use a stilt, which is what we're going to do. So we're going to take the back. Now I'm going to swirl around my glaze, watch, swirl around. Now I'm not going to rub it off, because then I'm going to get rid of all my glaze. So I'm just going to kind of make sure there's no extra that's going to be dripping, because I want it nice and thick. So now I'm just going to start painting it on. You really want a nice thick coat. See how this is covered and this is not? We want everything to be nice and thick. So my first job is to do a nice thick layer along all of the back and along this edge that I have. Okay, so do the back first, then the edge. Notice how I'm kind of lifting up my leaf from the bottom. That way I don't have to get my fingers in the glaze. Your fingers should not get messy during this. So I'm looking at the back and it dries really, really quickly. Before I flip it over, I'm going to make sure, do I have all of the white covered? Do I have one nice, thick, even coat all over my piece? When I feel like I do, and it should be dry, see how I can tell the difference between what's dry and what's not dry? Then I'm going to turn it over. Okay, now I'm going to be glazing the front of my piece same way. I'm just going to mix this up again, pull it out. Don't rub it off, because then you'll rub off all your glaze, but just gently tap it off so it doesn't drip. And this time I'm going to go in the direction of my veins. That's so I can get it down into all those little grooves. This time I have to be a little bit more careful. Make sure that I get it in all of these little spots there. See that white? I don't want that. So I want to make sure I use the end of my brush. And I'm going to go all over, including the edges again, to make sure that those are nice and covered. Okay, so boys and girls, I'm going to go with the direction of the veins so that it gets, or use the tip of it to push that glaze down inside all of the cracks. Do that part. Now you are an artist and a craftsman, which means you have good craftsmanship, you keep your area clean, so we shouldn't see any big puddles or slashes of ink. There shouldn't be, or glaze, there shouldn't be a ton of glaze anywhere on my brush other than where I was using it to stir at the beginning. I hardly have any glaze on my hands because I'm a craftsman and I'm taking care of my space. So before you bring this to Mrs. Snyder, you're going to ask yourself, did I cover all of the surfaces, front and back? Is there any little spots that I might have missed? Are there any big chunks that I need to kind of flake off? And I'm going to really carefully inspect my work. Whoops, I can see I missed a spot there, so I'm going to go back and fix it. Okay, so you're going to inspect your work carefully before you bring it back to Mrs. Snyder. Once you've brought it back to Mrs. Snyder, you're going to take your glaze, put the lid back on, screw it on all the way super tightly. You're going to put it back with all of its friends that have the same name. We're going to try something that Mrs. Merritt does to clean our brushes. There's a bucket here in the sink on the left side that says first rinse. I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to put it in that bucket and I'm going to push it against the bottom so that I'm kind of rinsing and I'm really pressing, swirling that around, try to get out most of the glaze. And remember, I wanted to brush this or wipe this off in the glaze container first so that I don't waste the glaze. And then now I'm going to move on a little bit further. There's a bin that says second rinse. Okay, and I'm rinsing off that soap and I'm still swooshing it all around. Just to make sure, I'm going to go to the tub called third rinse. I'm going to pull it out and look at it. Huh, it looks great. Squeeze out some of the water. Put it in this tub next to the sink that says brushes with the bristles up. Oh look, it's dancing.